The Mayan Civilization. The Mayan civilization, also called the Maya civilization, is the general name archaeologists give to several independent, loosely affiliated city states who shared cultural heritage in terms of language, customs, dress, artistic style, and material culture. They occupied the Central American continent, Mexico today, the Yucatan Peninsula specifically, including the southern parts of Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, an area of about 150,000 square miles. In general, researchers tend to split the Maya into the highland and lowland Maya. The Maya civilization covered an enormous area with a large variety of environments, economies, and growth of the civilization. Scholars address some of the Maya culture variations by studying separate issues related to the climate and environment of the region. Hmm. The climate and environment determined much of the architecture, why it looked so unique. The Maya highlands in the southern part of the Maya civilization, including the mountainous region in Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras. The Maya lowlands make up the northern segment of the Maya region, including Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula and adjacent parts of the Guatemala and Belize. A Pacific coastal Piedmont range north of the Soconusco had fertile soils, dense forests, and mangrove swamps. The Maya civilization was certainly never an empire, inasmuch as one person never ruled the entire region. During the classical period, there were several strong kings at Tikal, Calakmul, Caracol, and Dos Pilas, but none of them ever conquered the others. It's probably best to think of the Maya as a collection of independent city states who shared some ritual and ceremonial practices, some architecture, some cultural objects. The city states traded with one another and with the Olmec and Teotihuacan politics at different times. And they also warred with one another from time to time. So the Maya were around for a very long time. Mesoamerican archaeology is broken up into general sections. The Maya are in general thought to have maintained a cultural continuity between 500 BC, so right around when Rome was founded, and 900 AD, with the classic Maya between 250 to 900 AD. So a very long time, 1400 years. It begins with the Archaic period, which is before 2500 BC. This is the hunter and gathering lifestyle in Mesoamerica. Then comes the early formative era, and that's going to be from 2500 to 1000 BC. This is when the first beans and corn farming happen, and people live in isolated farmsteads and hamlets instead of wandering. The middle formative is 1000 BC to 400 BC. This is the first monumental architectures, the first civilizations, first villages. People switched to full time farming. There's evidence for contacts with the Olmec people and the first evidence of social ranking, things required for civilization. And this was about 600 to 400 BC. The late formative is 400 to 250 AD, 400 BC to 250 AD. This is when the first massive palaces are built at Urban, Nakbi, and El Mirador. The first writing is developed. Road systems are put in. Water control systems are put in. There's organized trade, widespread warfare also. Then the classic period is 250 AD to 900 AD, where widespread literacy is in evidence, including calendars and lists of royal lineages at Copan and Tikal. The first dynastic kingdoms arise amid changing political alliances. Large palaces and mortuary pyramids are constructed, and a sharp intensification of farming. Urban populations peak at about 100 people per square kilometer. Then the post classical, 980 to 1500, basically until Columbus shows up, or conquistadors. Some centers are abandoned during this time and writing records stop. Small rural towns prosper near rivers and lakes until the Spanish arrive in 1517. The known kings and leaders. Each independent Maya city had its own set of institutionalized rulers, beginning in the Classic period. It's 250 to 900 CE. AD, sorry. Documentary evidence for the kings and queens have been found on stelae, those are stone tablets, and temple wall inscriptions, and a few sarcophagi. During the Classic period, each king was generally in charge of a particular city and its supporting region. The area controlled by a specific king might be hundreds or even thousands of square kilometers. The ruler's court included palaces, temples, and ball courts, and great plazas, open areas where festivals and other public events were held. Kings were hereditary positions. You're born into it, and at least after they were dead, the king were sometimes considered gods. So, some important facts about the Maya civilization. About population, there's no complete population estimate, but it must have been in the millions. In the 1600s, the Spanish reported that there were between 600 to a million people living in the Yucatan Peninsula alone. That's the lowland Maya. Each of the larger cities probably had populations over 100,000. But that doesn't count the rural sectors that supported the larger cities. A note about the environment: the Maya lowland region, below elevations of 2,600 feet, is tropical, with rainy and dry seasons. There's little exposed water except in lakes and limestone faults, swamps, and cenotes, which are natural sinkholes in the limestone that are geologically a result of the of a crater impact. Originally, the area was blanketed with multiple canopied forests, mixed vegetation. In the highland Maya region, there's a string of volcanically active mountains. Eruptions have dumped rich volcanic ash throughout the region, leading to deep, rich soils and obsidian deposits. A good thing to trade. The climate in the highland is temperate, with rare frost. Upland forests originally were mixed pine and deciduous trees. The written language. The Mayan language, the various groups spoke nearly 30 closely related languages and dialects, including the Mayan and the Huastec. When it comes to writing, the Maya had 800 distinct hieroglyphs, pictures that represent a word, with the first evidence of language written on a stela and walls of buildings beginning in 300 BC. Bark, cloth, paper codexes were being used no later than 1500s. All but a handful were destroyed by the Spanish, however. Talk about their calendar system. The so called long count calendar was invented by the Mayan speakers based on the extent of a Mesoamerican calendar. It was adopted by the classic period Maya, around 200 AD. The earliest inscription in long count among the Maya was made dated 292 AD, and the earliest date listed on the long count calendar is about August 11th, 3114 BC. What the Maya said was the founding date of their civilization. The first dynastic calendars were being used by about 400 BC. The extent of written records of the Maya. There's only a few things that survive, unfortunately. Their calendar is the biggest thing they left for us. And a calendar is based on astronomy. The Dresden Codex, written during the late post classical period, 1250 AD, includes astronomical tables on Venus and Mars. It talks about eclipses. It talks about seasons and the movement of the tides. These tables chart the seasons with respect to their civic year, predict solar and lunar eclipses, and track the motion of the planets. There are a handful of observatories, which are buildings to track the movement of the sun, moon, and planets and stars, such as that at Chichen Itza. Rituals. Well, there's intoxicants. They had chocolate, they had fermented honey, morning glory seeds, agave plants, tobacco, and they had sweat baths with specialized buildings to create internal sweat baths are known. They had the Mayan gods. What we know of Maya religion is based on writings and drawings on the codices or temples. A few of the gods include a god of death, a god of rain and lightning, a god of sacredness, a creator god, a learning god, a corn god, a sun god, a trade god. There was a god for fertility, and there are others. There are sometimes combined gods, glyphs for two different gods appearing on one glyph. When it comes to death and afterlife, ideas about death and the afterlife are little known. The entry to the underworld was called a place of fright. So they did believe in an afterlife. The Maya economy. The Maya engaged in long distance trade, beginning at least as early as 2000 BC. But little is known about its organization. Trade connections are known to have been established between pre classic Maya and the people in Olmec towns. By about 1100 BC, the raw material for goods such as obsidian jade and marn shell and magnetite was brought into urban centers. There were periodic markets established in most of the Mayan cities. The volume of trade varied over time, but much of what archaeologists used to identify a community that was hooked into the Maya sphere was the shared material goods and religion that were no doubt established and supported by trade networks. Symbols and iconographic motifs depicted on highly crafted items like pottery and figurines were shared over the widespread area, along with ideas and religion. The interregional interaction was driven by the emergent chiefs and elites who had greater access to specific classes of goods and information. They built canoes, they had specialty crafts they built, they had elite classes and social stratification. The Maya economics were intimately tied to hierarchical classes. The social disparity in wealth and status separated the nobles from ordinary people, but only slaves were a sharply bound social class. There were craft specialists, artisans who specialized in making pottery and stone tools, and minor merchants who were a loosely defined middle group that ranked below the aristocrats, but above common farmers. In Maya society, slaves were made up of criminals and prisoners obtained during warfare. Most slaves performed domestic service or farming labor, but some became victims for sacrificial ritual. The men, they were mostly men, who ruled the cities had sons whose family and lineage connections led them to continue family political careers. Younger sons who had no available offices to step into or were unsuited for political life turned to commerce or went into the priesthood. Maya politics. The warfare. Some of the Maya cities were fortified, protected by walls or moats, and military bases and battles are illustrated in Maya art by the early classical period. Warrior classes, including some professional warriors, were part of the Maya society. Wars were fought over territory, slaves, and to avenge insults. When it comes to weapons, forms of defense and offensive weapons included axes, clubs, maces, throwing spears, shields, helmets, bladed spears. Ritual sacrifice was a part of the politics. The Maya did sacrifice objects by throwing them into cenotes, and placing them with burials. They also pierced their tongues, earlobes, genitals, and other body parts for blood sacrifice. Animals, mostly jaguars, were sacrificed, and as were humans, human sacrifice, including high ranking enemy warriors who were captured, tortured, and sacrificed. Architecture. The first stone steles were carved and erected during the classical period, and the earliest is from Tikal, where a stele is dated 292 AD. Glyphs signified specific rulers. A specific sign called the Aha is today interpreted as Lord. There were distinctive architectural styles in the Maya from all over the place and all over the centuries. Perhaps since each one was an independent city state, there's no uniformity. There's a lot of uniqueness in their architecture. Sites in the Mayas. Well, the best way to learn about the Maya is to go and visit the archaeological ruins. Many of them are open to the public and have museums, guided tours, bookstores on the sites. You can find Maya archaeological sites in Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and a lot of Mexico too. Spectacles and spectators walking tour the Maya plazas. And that'll complete this lesson on the Maya. They're still there. You can go visit. Please do. Why was astronomy so important to the Maya? Why do they have these observatories and track the tides, the seasons, the eclipses? What did that have to do with anything? Why do you think the Maya had a unique architecture? Why didn't all their cities look the same? How did the Mayans stay in power for so long? What was their key to success?